Welcome back to session 3, part 2. We're going to pick up where we left off at in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah. And we find here where Abraham takes his son that he loves, and he goes off on a father-son trip. And the greatest thing about this is in verse 1, it says, Behold, here I am. What that is saying is, I am willing, Lord. I'm going to listen to exactly what you want me to do. And so they go up to the mountain, and Isaac says, Father, I see the wood, I see the knife, I see all these things. Well, where's the sacrifice? And Abraham says, God will provide. And just as he's getting ready to slay his son at the request of the Lord, an angel appears unto him, speaks to him, and stops him. And a ram appears in the thicket, in the bush on the side, and a sacrifice was provided. Now, when Isaac was 37 years old, Sarah died. However, Abraham lived for another 38 years. In Genesis chapter 25, verse 1, then again, Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah, and she bare him Zimron, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shuah. In verse 5, and Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac, and Isaac lived a quiet, peaceable life. At the age of 40, he married a lady by the name of Rebekah. And we pick up in chapter 25. If you would, turn to Genesis chapter 25. And verse 1, and Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife, because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. Isn't it amazing the things that go on in the spiritual realm? Verse 24, and when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out all red, all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So I don't think it's too hard to understand why Isaac loved Esau so much and Rebekah loved Jacob so much. One was a mama's boy, and the other one was kind of father's son of the great hunter, could bring him venison, a man that loved to be outside. But we read something here that took place in chapter 25, verse 29. One day Esau came home from hunting, and he's starving. Now, how many times have you been so hungry that you would say, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse? Now, obviously, we're not serious that we would go eat a horse. But Esau comes in and he says, I'm starving. And Jacob sees an opportunity. He's over there making a pot of lentils, a pot of stew, and he says, give me your birthright. And in that moment of rash decisions, and in that moment of him being hangry, he makes a decision that would change the rest of his life. He says, it's yours. You can have my birthright. And a birthright was not just something to take lightly, But a birthright, you were the priest and the authority over the family. You had a double portion of everything. And Esau sold it to Jacob for a small meal. Think about that. All of this for a small meal. But how many times do we do the same things? We settle for a temporal pleasure, something here on earth that has eternal ramifications. Romans chapter 9, verse 13, as it is written, Jacob have I loved, and Esau have I hated. It was such a despicable act to trade your birthright away that the terminology hate is used. Hebrews chapter 12, 16 and 17, lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For ye know how that afterward, when he would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place of repentance, that he sought it carefully with tears. So as time went by, Esau hated Jacob for what he had did, for being tricked. But I believe he hated himself for the decision that he made. He had to live with regret the rest of his life. Jacob found out and knew that Esau was getting so angry with him that he wanted to kill him, that he decided to move away. For the next 20 years, Jacob lives with his uncle Laban. He meets this beautiful lady, and he speaks with her father, and he makes this deal. He said, I will work 7 years if I can marry Rachel. They say love is blind. Well, the best verse that I can find to validate love is blind is Genesis chapter 29, verse 20. And here's what it says. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel. And here's the love is blind portion. And they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had for her. It seemed but a few days at 7 years. Love is blind. But as we read, and we find that Laban tricks Jacob. And before you know it, Jacob now has 2 wives and must work another 7 years to get Rachel. So love is blind. He had to work 14 years to have Rachel as his wife. And during this time period, he has 11 sons and 1 daughter born to him. And finally, Jacob decided, it's been a long enough time. I want to return home. And chapter 32, verse 3, and Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Moving down to verse 6. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. So what he found out by sending some servants ahead was that Esau hadn't forgotten what had taken place. He hadn't forgotten how Jacob had tricked him. You don't come with 400 men as a welcoming party. You come with 400 men, that's an army. So as we move on, he's journeying towards his brother. He decides to spend some time alone. He sends out some groups of gifts of livestock to appease his brother. He's hoping that as his brother encounters each group, it will lessen his anger. Oh, you gave me a gift. Oh, you honored me. That he would feel better and better. But we find that Jacob wants some time alone. In verse 32, chapter 32, verse 24, and Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him unto the breaking of day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless thee. And he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be Jacob, no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with man, and hast prevailed. So we find that this is a new man with a new name. He's not anymore the deceiver. It's not Jacob, the supplanter. It's not Jacob, the one that stole the birthright. But now his name is Israel, that has power with God and with me. And in chapter 32, and Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, him and his 400 men. And he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. You see what happens when you get into the presence of God? You see what happens when you put aside, or God changes you from the inside out? Things happen around you. Esau may have came with one mission, to destroy Jacob, but instead he now is hugging and greeting his brother, formerly known as Jacob, Israel, and he's loving on him. That was a prayer meeting that changed everything. And if I can encourage you, get into prayer, get into the Word of God. It will change your life. It will change your perspective. It will change your attitude when you meet with Jesus Christ. So we then go into where Israel becomes a nation. We were on promise. Israel becomes a nation. In Genesis chapter 37, we are progressing through Genesis. We are almost to the end of it. Chapter 37, verses 1 through 4, and Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock of his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bela and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. So many are familiar with this biblical individual. It's of Jacob's 12 sons. We read about Joseph, the most favored, the family pet. And to show his love, Jacob awards Joseph a coat of many colors. Now, this was a beautiful, extravagant, expensive coat. This wasn't a coat that you went out and you fed the livestock or you worked in the field. This was the coat of someone that was favored by the father. This is someone that was staying around and more managing the family business. But his brothers also suspected that he would receive the birthright blessings. We have the brothers over here. We have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Joseph, and then last we have Benjamin that comes along later. But we have Joseph telling his dreams in Genesis chapter 27. And as Joseph is telling his dreams, every dream has a common theme. It's of everything in the dream bowing down to Joseph. His brothers don't like it. His father's upset over it. And it just adds fuel to the fire that Joseph is telling and sharing these dreams. So we read about this in Genesis 37. His brothers are out feeding the father's flock in Shechem. And Israel tells Joseph, go out and let me know what your brothers are doing. And he says, here am I. He's available to his father. And as we move through chapter 37, and when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto him, his brothers see him and they're like, is that Joseph? Yeah, it has to be. The height's right. The walk is right. Wait a minute. I see the coat now. Yep, it's the coat. That coat would stand out anywhere. Do you have a coat like that, Gad? No, I don't. Do you have a coat like that, Reuben? No, I don't have a coat like that. And so they see him and they conspire against him to take their brother. And that what they say is, let us slay him and cast him into a pit, and say some evil beast devoured him. But what eventually happens, as they throw him in the pit, his brothers come back. They sell him into slavery. From slavery, he's taken into Egypt. While in Egypt, he's sold to the house of Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh. And this was a man of importance. This was not just your common judge, but this was a man of great importance to Pharaoh. And you may look at this and say, what an unfair life. God's hand, though, was upon Joseph through every situation, through every trial that he went through. God was with him. And in chapter 39, verse 2, it just confirms this. And the Lord was with Joseph. That's repeated multiple times. The Lord was with Joseph. It might seem unfair to our human nature what Joseph was going through, but God was positioning him. God was moving him to where he wanted him to be. Many times we would not go where God wanted us to be. We would look at it and say, there's no way. I don't want to do that. But God's fingerprints were on Joseph's life. So he's in Potiphar's house, and then we read where Potiphar's wife makes demands for Joseph to lie with her, and he refuses. And she lies about it. She makes false claims against him. We then read where Joseph is in jail, and he finds favor again. The jailer puts Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. Now you tell me that's not the hand of God? That's amazing. A prisoner is in charge of the prisoners. Well, while he's there, some of the Pharaoh's butler and his baker get thrown into jail, and Joseph interprets some dreams for them. And what you realize is that God was positioning Joseph to be there for a greater work. So he's in prison. He interprets the dreams. He tells the butler and the baker some good news, some bad news, but he says, don't forget about me. Remember me here in prison. Now, one of them goes on with their lives. The other one loses his head. And as life's going on, Pharaoh has a dream. And then the butler says unto Pharaoh, wait a minute. I know somebody that can interpret your dreams. There was a man that I was in prison with, and his name was Joseph. He can interpret your dreams. So Joseph comes before Pharaoh. He interprets the dreams. And because of him interpreting the dreams, we read about this in Genesis chapter 41, verse 41. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. There was one man that Joseph reported to, and that was Pharaoh. He had the second highest position in the land. And God was putting him there because a famine came upon the land, and Joseph knew exactly what to do. He was in charge of it. They began to save. They began to store grain. And as the famine crept closer and closer, people would come to Egypt to buy of these individuals. And so as we read here, as we get ready to close up here, our second part of session 3, now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither. We realize that everything Joseph went through, being hated by his brothers, sold into slavery, sold into the house of Potiphar, into jail, back into the house of Pharaoh, and second in charge of the country and of the nation. We finally realize, as his brothers bow down before him, what the dreams meant so many years before. That God had a master plan, And Joseph, the entire time, was willing to be a part of that plan. And God had his hand upon Joseph. I pray that you are enjoying these Bible studies, that they're a blessing to you. Session 4, we'll be ending our study on the book of Genesis and going into the book of Exodus, talking about Moses, that God sends a deliverer. And enjoy your time with the Lord. Enjoy your time in his word. Thank you.